Hi, my name is Nikki Johnson. I'm a member here at MCC Albuquerque. I want to welcome you. So it's my pleasure to introduce Doug in our talk today. His bio is long, and he said, "Don't say all that stuff," but I'll just say a few things. He's, you know, what he carries with him to be his presence that I've experienced already as a pastor, as an author, as an activist, as somebody who loves God and knows that the people of God knows that like here at church they say don't touch the microphone, so I don't. um, and he knows it's the people of God who can make the difference to make this world a better place. And when I came in today and they already had their stuff up, I just thought one of the lines that struck me that speaks so loudly to vote common good is a more perfect union, in that we still believe in a more perfect union. And I think that's the battle that we fight, because there are some folks who have lost that belief. So it's my pleasure to introduce Doug Paget.
Thank you, Nikki. Hey, y'all, we're really glad to be here. You might not know how much work it was for us to get here. We've been planning and replanning and canceling. We had to cancel one time because our bus broke down, and we are just glad to be here. Sometimes that old adage, just showing up, is what you do to win. But we are really glad to be here for a number of reasons. One of the members of our team, Beth, who's in the back there, lives here in Albuquerque, so we like to come to people's hometown. Hello, Beth. By the way, next to her is Tim. Out in the bus right now, or setting up stuff, is Christine. You already heard from Joel. You're going to hear from Dan. You're going to hear from Nick. I'm Doug. We travel the country on that bus, and sometimes it's this configuration of us, sometimes it's other configurations. And some people haven't been to New Mexico yet. And I get all excited whenever somebody gets to come to New Mexico who hasn't been here yet, because they're about to see something, I tell them, that will change their vision of the sky and how the air is supposed to feel. So I just have this real magical relationship to New Mexico. So much so that at the, I think we're coming in on 40. We drove here from Dallas yesterday, got in last night. At the first Flying J that we got to, I bought a New Mexico shirt because I hadn't brought one. So, gas station purchase of a New Mexico shirt and a state flag patch and all the rest. So anyway, super glad to be here. So if you see an extra little pep in my step or smile on my face, that's part of what this is about. But I will say it's not easy to have to walk out of that beautiful air out there and come into a room and have to talk about this. To tell you the truth, we'd rather not be traveling the country talking about the threat of Christian nationalism. In fact, we'd like to live in a country where we don't have to live with the threat of Christian nationalism. We use this phrase, confronting Christian nationalism, not only to mean that we need to do something to confront its existence, but what do you do when you are confronted with it? And you are confronted with it, whether you recognize it all the time, whether it's obvious, or whether you feel it in the air, or you see it in the policies, or you watch it happen when people not of Christian faith are turned down in our society and pushed down and set aside. And as Nikki said, I'm a pastor. I've been an evangelical pastor my entire adult life, from this little carve-out group, a little cul-de-sac of evangelicalism called progressive evangelicalism. So a lot of people know that there's conservative evangelicals, but not everybody. Some people come out of that tradition and follow the way of Jesus that leads us into greater inclusion, greater oneness, greater harmony, and all the rest. So that's been the tradition that I've been in. But the family of faith and the family of this country and the grand we, the all of supporting democracy for all, means we're going to live with Christian nationalists in this country. So we're going to talk a bit about that and take our way through it. Now, a couple of things are going to happen today as we talk. We're going to help you try to understand as best as we can today from our vantage point. We know you all have your own content on this. What is Christian nationalism? Why is it attractive to people? What can organizations do about it? And what can individuals do about it? Our hope is that you leave here today feeling like Christian nationalism is something that you can understand enough to feel empowered to respond as you want. Response is important. Reaction is hard. We're all going to react to things. And we live in a very reactive society, especially when it comes to Christian nationalism, or somebody taking over an elementary school or a school board or a library or a county commission or the United States Congress as a Christian nationalist. We can find ourselves reacting to that stuff. What we're hoping you'll come out of today with is some help in how to respond, so you can respond the way you want and feel like you understand what's going on. So that's what we're hoping for. We're not here to scare you. And I'll tell you a couple other rules that I have, at least as one of the presenters today. In my mind, I have two people sitting here. One of his name is Adam, and one's name is Casey. These are both friends of mine. I'm in touch with Casey constantly on text and all this. Both pastors, one in Colorado, one in Texas. Both Christian nationalists, both hardcore Trumpers. And I stay in touch with them because they're friends of mine. I have Christian nationalists in my family. Maybe you do too. I know people who are Christian nationalists in this country know me and love me, and I know them and I love them. So I've got to figure out, what do we do about this? Because this is not a way we can keep moving as a country. But what do we do when we have these people in our country, in our family and all? So as I talk today, I'm going to be sure that I'm not only checking in with making sure I'm telling you the truth as I know it, but I want to make sure that if Casey or Adam were sitting here, everything that we present, they would nod along with and say, yeah, that's what we believe. I think it's really important that we not speak about Christian nationalists in ways that Christian nationalists don't speak about themselves. One, because it's just better to be truthful. And two, you don't have to exaggerate these people at all. We use this joke about Donald Trump all the time, but the Christian nationalists are the same way. They're a self-cleaning oven, and they do all the work for you. Just listen to what they say. So a number of things that you're going to see on the screen today, in video format and otherwise, is straight from Christian nationalists, and that's what we want to respond to. So we don't want to create any boogeymen. We don't want to create any straw men. We want to talk about what actually exists. And if anything, we want to do the opposite of straw man and create an Iron Man. Give their best argument that they can make so that you know your response to their best argument is sufficient. So that's some of what we're going to do today. Then we hope that you're going to leave here with a greater sense of empathy and engagement. We honestly believe that human empathy and human engagement is the best antidote to Christian nationalism, because it's built on exclusion, it's built on separation, and it's built on power. So the ways around it are to be sure that we respond and that our country responds in those ways. So, okay, we're going to get into that. Somebody said to us the other day, hey, how long have you all been doing this Christian nationalism training thing? And I thought, well, it was about 3:30 on Wednesday, January 6, 2021, when I thought, yeah, we're going to have to talk about this issue more than we have. Because the insurrection took place, and it was led by, funded by, both financially and in concept, Christian nationalists and Christian nationalism. On the day before January 6th, that night, Christians had organized something called the Jericho Marches. They gathered together. You're going to see some video clip of Michael Flynn speaking at that event, where he says, tomorrow we're going to do this and this. That was at that event on January 5th called the Jericho March, where they invited Christians and bussed them in bus after bus from churches from around the country to march around the United States Capitol, invoking the narrative of the Jewish text, telling us about the march around Jericho to get the walls to come crashing down, to stop the certification of free and fair election in the United States. One of the founders of new Christian nationalist movement in the United States in the 1970s, a guy named Paul Warwick, said, democracy is not our goal. In fact, democracy can get in the way. These folks have a different agenda that you will hear from them and you'll see today about what they're up to. And democracy could be an option, but it need not be for the vision they have of this country and countries around the world. So it was on that day that we really reorganized. And then a few days later, we saw this footage that I'm about to show you. This footage is from shot inside the Senate dais on January 6th by a reporter from the New Yorker that was embedded with the people outside. It's the first people to crash into the building. You're going to see someone you might recognize if your mind goes back far enough to those days. He's often referred to as the QAnon shaman. and he's at the center of this of this group, and they lead a prayer inside the Senate dais, having just gotten in the building. It's a little disturbing, and if any people are triggered, as we all can be by this kind of thing, I'll just let you know you're about to hear it in full motion. Here we go.
Prayer, all the way back to the monument. All the way back to the monument of DC.
Jesus Christ, we invoke your name. Amen.
Let's all say a prayer in this sacred space.
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for gracing us with this opportunity. Thank you. Let me take it back. Thank you, Heavenly Father.
Amen.
For this opportunity to stand up for our God-given unalienable rights. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving the inspiration needed to these police officers to allow us in this building, to allow us to exercise our rights, to allow us to send a message to all the tyrants, the communists, and the globalists, that this is our nation, not theirs.
Yes.
That we will not allow the American way of the United States of America to go down. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent creator God, for filling this chamber with your white light of love, with your white light of harmony. Thank you for filling this chamber with patriots that love you and that love Christ. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent creator God, for blessing each and every one of us here and now. Thank you, divine creator God, for surrounding and filling us with your divine, omnipresent white light of love and protection, peace and harmony. Thank you for allowing the United States of America to be reborn. Thank you for allowing us to get rid of the communists, the globalists, and the traitors within our government. We love you and we thank you. In Christ's holy name we pray.
If you come from certain religious backgrounds, you might recognize that kind of language. You might recognize that style of prayer. You might recognize the way that the hands go up or the gestures. You might recognize that some people have their eyes closed, and like in every prayer meeting, some people have their eyes open. But you recognize how that prayer goes, and you hear it. That is the inaugural action inside the Senate dais. Maybe at that moment, someone was defecating in the Capitol. Maybe at that moment down the hall, someone was raiding Nancy Pelosi's office. Maybe people were stealing a lectern down the hall. But this was at the heart of the insurrection. This is at the heart of MAGAism. The Make America Great Again movement is a firmly rooted Christian nationalist movement. When they're talking about the kind of America that they want, it is rooted in a Christian nationalist imagination. So that's what we face. It's real, it's serious, it's threatening, and all the rest. And we again, as I mentioned earlier, we believe the best way to deal with all of this is with empathy, engagement, and curiosity. So I want you to consider 3 questions as we make our way through the day. Maybe you're thinking about a Christian nationalist friend that you have. I would think of someone, there's a film called God and Country. Do you happen to be familiar with that? It was put up by Rob Reiner. It's a documentary about Christian nationalism in America today. I'm in that film, and we did a screening in Minneapolis, a big one, at a theater full of people. And my wife's father's wife and my wife's brother came to the screening. And on the way home, my wife's father's wife said to my wife, well, after seeing that film, I think I would be more on the Christian nationalist side of things. So she saw what could have been, should have been, to many of our minds, a warning about Christian nationalism and said, oh, that's what we call it. She didn't know that there was a term called Christian nationalism. She thought if you said Christian nationalist, you were just trying to be mean to Christians. So I'm sensitive to this, maybe you are too, that there's people we know who don't know the category of what they hold to and believe is what oftentimes is referred to as Christian nationalism. And while the title doesn't matter, the content does. So I want you to consider engagement with these 3 questions. Someone in your life. What do you believe? What do they hold to? Consider ways to maybe ask them, really, what do they believe? Because Christian nationalism is really complicated and complex. And some people hold to a whole lot of it. Some people hold to just a portion. Some people are on a spectrum of I'm really into it or I'm not really into it. So where are you is a great question. It's also really good questions just for any way to understand someone around difference. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? Like, where's that come from? What fuels that? What's been your experience? And really listening is really hard, right? We all know this. Really listening to each other or to ourselves is really hard. Then there's a third question. I think this is the doozy, and sometimes just go straight to it, make it the first. And that is, what role does your belief play in your life? What does it do for you? You know, all of our beliefs are functional. They do something. They're operative. So the real question is, what does Christian nationalism belief do for a person? Because if we don't know how it operates in someone's life, it's really hard to figure out how we can help them leave it behind or step away from it. So what's its function? What does it do? How does it operate? These are really important questions for us to consider as we're asking people. And as we think about our country. So as you think about this, not just in an individual, personal way, why are so many people into Christian nationalism? What is it doing for them, to them, with them? And how do they engage? Now, let me say this. Christian nationalism is not about telling Christians not to be public about their faith. Christian nationalism and critiquing Christian nationalism is not some phony belief ginned up by the liberal left to try to get Christians to be quiet. We travel in a bus that says faith, hope, and love, supporting democracy for all, for crying out loud, right? I think we need to live in a world where more people say more things, not where more people say less things. Christian nationalism is not about Christians exercising their faith. Christian nationalism is about the government advocating for, deriving its authority from, or granting privilege to the Christian faith. That's Christian nationalism. So when you're confronted with someone who says to you, oh, Christian nationalism, that's just a bunch of gobbledygook, just simply ask them, do you think the federal government, do you think the state government, the local government, the school board, the county commission, do you think any of those groups should advocate for Christianity and Christian beliefs in the policies they pass? Do you think they should grant extra privilege to Christians over others? Do you think our government derives its authority from the Christian teaching? If you believe that this was a nation started as a Christian nation and all of our rights come from God, then are you saying that we are indebted to Christianity for our nation? Then it doesn't matter what someone calls themselves. A Christian nationalist, a libertarian, a green, who cares? If you think that the federal government, state government, local government should be advocating for, deriving its authority from, and granting privilege to the Christian faith, well then, that's where the problem lies. Now, we could do an entire seminar and travel the country on what's the impact of Christian nationalism on communities of faith. How does it destroy communities of Christianity around the country? And it does. It's really problematic. We're not talking about that today. That would be a whole separate conversation, which we could have at some point. But we're not talking about, hey, is Christianity doing okay in America because of Christian nationalism? Great question. Not ours. Our question is our democracy doing okay because of Christian nationalism? And it's not. So that's where we're going to spend our time today. Now, I will also say this. The question of Christian nationalism and how it plays out in our society is as American as we can get. We have been having this conversation as a nation since before our founding. In fact, depending on when you want to say America began, if you're into origin stories, you could say America was a Christian nation. If you want to count the colonies, like Pennsylvania, as the beginning of America, if you want to say that it started with the Pilgrims' arrival, who came to bring a Christian nation ethic to the colonies. In Pennsylvania, there were whole places where you couldn't be a landowner, you couldn't be in government unless you held to certain Christian denominations, certain Christian faith. The Moravians owned whole parts of Pennsylvania. We were just there. We were just there in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. A little town called Bethlehem, and the town next to it, Nazareth. It's adorable. Like they are really remaking biblical narrative with the founding of those places. So some people could argue we started as a Christian nation. If you start with the colonies. Other people would say, no, we're going to start the nation at the founding of our revolution. And some people will say, well, then we were a Christian nation when we threw off the shackles of England. A Christian nation, by the way. Now, there is debate in the United States whether the United States was a Christian nation. There's no debate whether England was a Christian nation. It is the Church of England is the Church of England. It is a Christian nation. In fact, the word anti-disestablishmentarianism, a word that used to be many of us, if you're, I'm guessing of our ages in this room, was the longest word in the English dictionary. That's another word meaning Christian nationalism. The Establishment Clause, to establish an official religion, is what England had done. There were people who wanted to in England who wanted to disestablish Christianity as the legal religion of England. So they wanted to disestablish. Then there was a group of people who did not want to disestablish. So they were the counter or the anti-disestablishmentarian group. So our longest word is Christian nationalism in the English dictionary, right? Okay, so it's been around. It was in our founding as colonies, but not in our founding as a nation. So if you start the country with the founding of with a revolutionary move, or with the establishment of our Constitution, or with our First Amendment, no matter when you start, it's clear people have been having this argument and conversation the entire time in America. It's as American as apple pie and hot dogs and Chevrolet. In fact, been around longer than 2 out of the 3 of those. The beginning of the First Amendment, as you probably all memorized, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Now, that was a point to England, but also a point to the colonies, because they were debating this like crazy. How are we going to do it? Are we going to establish official religion? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise of, or the abridging freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people to assemble and to bring their needs before Congress. The first words of the First Amendment in the Constitution, Congress shall make no law establishing religion or prohibiting it. So some people read something like that, know the history, and say, they said it, that settles it. It's over. Another way to look at all the amendments have been, oh, this is going to stick around for a while. Almost no amendment to our Constitution or laws that have been passed did everyone simply say, okie dokie, let's just move on now then. So one way to look at this is said and settled. The other way is this is going to be around for a while. And then it showed up again in the slavery movement. And then it showed up again in the Make America Great movement of the 1910s and 20s and 30s. And then it showed up again in the Cold War. And then it showed up again in Reaganomics. And then it showed up again, all different variants leading us to today. So this has been a serious conversation in the United States. Now, some people are comforted by that. They sort of sit back in their chair and think, okay, we can do this as Americans, and it's going to come back. It's like a seasonal cold, and we're going to see it again. Let's get Kleenex out. Let's wash our hands and figure out what we do when the virus shows up. That's the attitude I take. Other people, it just drives them out of their minds that for 268 years, we keep fighting about this same dumb shit over and over and over again, and they don't want to keep doing it. So, however it goes, we have to distinguish between a citizen's right to express their faith and be driven by their faith and the government's role in privileging Christianity. Here's what makes it hard in the United States. We are a we the people, of the people, for the people, by the people, representative form of republic that uses a democracy system to elect our representatives. But it's just us, right? There ain't nobody else. There's no magical people, senators, Congress people, city workers, city council people. They're just us. That's all we got. There's no kings. There's no gods. Nobody's given any special power. It's just us. Then you hang around churches, and pastors will say to the people in the church, churches aren't just our buildings. Churches aren't our theologies. Churches aren't our structures. Churches are the people. What do you do if it's the same people? Where does the line of the faith stop and the role of the government begin? So this is a project we, the people, have to figure out. Now, I've had the privilege for the last 6 years of being represented by Ilhan, or six of the last 7 years being represented by Ilhan Omar. I live in Minneapolis. She's been my congressperson. She's a Somali woman, a Muslim woman. Her faith means a lot to her. I'm really proud as a Christian pastor to vote for her and support her. But I don't want her using the Quran as the legitimacy for the laws that she's going to pass. My current representative is Dean Phillips, because I was redistricted out of Ilhan Omar's and into Dean Phillips. Dean Phillips is a Jewish man. I don't want Dean using Torah to set the laws. The person who's going to win the race, because Dean Phillips is not running for re-election and a new person is running, is a Christian woman. And I don't want Terry Morrison to use her book of Matthew as the foundation for her teaching. So where does an individual's faith stop and the government action begin? Some people are like, nowhere, no separation, no distinction. So when we talk about Christian nationalism, we're not talking about don't elect vote people who are of Christian or other faiths. We're not saying tell Christians not to vote. We're saying don't think the government does your work for you. That's not how this all goes. Okay, there's a new variant of Christian nationalism alive and well in America, which I like to call Christian Nationalism 2019. Pairs very well with COVID-19, because the things that drove so many people into QAnon and elsewhere during COVID are the same things that have driven them to Christian nationalism today. You're going to see that when you start hearing from the Christian nationalists here in a moment. Church lockdowns, the Department of Health, all of these places, they think were all precursor to shutting churches down. You hang around hardcore Christian nationalists for any amount of time, and they will tell you COVID-19 was practice for what the government ultimately wants to do in America, to wipe out Christianity. They're convinced not that they own Christianity or that they own the government as Christians, but that the government is opposed to them, is attacking them, and they have to take over the government in order to protect themselves from the liberals who want to take their government from them, right? So there's two different storylines going on. And this new variant of Christian nationalism, the belief is this, that the United States is appointed by God to convert the world to Christianity by force if necessary. And they seek to accelerate the return of Jesus to earth in order to bring about those outcomes. According to their theory, they're writing here, the divine mission of God will be carried out when true believers seize control of the institutions of the United States government. Christian nationalists don't just want "in God we trust" on our currency. Christian nationalism isn't just built around the United States. They want the entire world to be globalized, to be Christianized. And they want it to happen through the United States. So we'll give you a little example of this here in a minute. You're going to see something now called the Watchman Decree and Prayer. Okay, the Watchman Decree is a group of Christian nationalists in a big meeting. They read it all out loud. It'll take about 3 minutes. You'll hear it in a moment, and it will live up to the hype that's about to get. But it's built on something really important. It's built on a notion of Christian nationalism that's called the Seven Mountains. The Seven Mountains are a theory that's been roaming around for 50 or 60 years, but has really become significant since about 2006 or 7, and really hit its stride in 2019 and 2020 with COVID. The belief is this: just as Moses in the Jewish text went up onto Mount Sinai and received the blessing of God to be the leader of Israel, there are 7 mountains of cultural influence, and we need leaders in all 7 mountains, in all 7 areas. Now, they're not wrong about how you influence society and culture. What they want to do with it is really where the problem is. So the 7, as you can see up here, include arts and entertainment, sets the pattern for culture, business, education, family, government, media, religion. So what they're doing is recruiting people globally in every nation to be leaders in all 7 of those areas. That's what they want. The National Prayer Breakfast that you might hear about happens every spring is run by 7 Mountains people. They're bringing leaders from around the world to interact together in the United States, in Washington, D.C., to be influencers in all 7 areas, especially around religion and government, so that they can be poised to lead every nation in global conversion. That's what they're up to. When you're asking yourself a question, what do Christian nationalists get out of Christian nationalism? One of the things many of them get out of it is a global view with a big agenda. They're not just trying to fix a book in the library. They want to own it all. They have an insatiable appetite for takeover. All right, so here's the Watchman Decree. You're going to see it here in a minute. The guy on the right over there is named Dutch Sheets. He's going to be the one reading this out loud, and the whole crowd's going to read it. And you're going to see it all up on the screen at their event. Dutch Sheets is not he's not the devil. He's a guy that went to college with Tim Gilman sitting right back there. So they went to college together. So he's just a guy with really bad ideas that keep spreading them and people keep following him. And that's sort of how it goes sometimes. So you're going to hear him reading this. And if it feels like it's about to freak you out, I get that. It freaks me out too. And the response to that are other people doing other things. So here it is, the Watchman Decree.
All right, go ahead. All right, Dutch, lead us.
So we'll read it together, okay? As a patriot of faith, I attest my allegiance first and foremost to the kingdom of God and the Great Commission. Secondly, I agree to be a watchman over our nation concerning its people and their rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Whereas we, the church, are God's governing body on the earth. Whereas we have been given legal power from heaven and now exercise our authority. Whereas we are God's ambassadors and spokespeople over the earth. Whereas through the power of God, we are the world influencers. Whereas because of our covenant with God, we are equipped and delegated by Him to destroy every attempted advance of the enemy. We make our declarations. We decree that America's executive branch of government will honor God and defend the Constitution. We decree that our legislative branch, Congress, will write only laws that are righteous and constitutional. We decree that our judicial system will issue rulings that are biblical and constitutional. We declare that we stand against wokeness, the occult, and every evil attempt against our nation. We declare and we now take back our God-given freedoms according to our Constitution. We declare that we take back influence at the local level in our communities. We decree that we take back and permanently control positions of influence and leadership in each of the 7 mountains. We decree that the blood of Jesus covers and protects our nation. It protects and separates us from God. We declare that our nation is energy dependent. We declare that America is strong spiritually, financially, militarily, and technologically. We decree that evil carries no power, authority, or rights in our land nor over our people. We decree that we will
Told you. This is what they're up to, right? A big vision, taking over the globe, taking over the world, and they want to be energy independent. I mean, when that comes up nearly every time, you can almost feel people in the room chuckle a little like, what on earth is that doing in there? Like, what's next? We're going to make sure we floss every day and keep healthy gums? Or maybe this movement is funded by big oil, which it is. So that's the heart of Christian nationalism. Now, when my father-in-law's wife saw this documentary I mentioned, this part was in there. That's what made her think, oh no, that's what I think. If you're sitting here thinking that's a problem, there's a bunch of people who are like, well, that was a clear articulation. I just kind of had that all jumbled up inside of me, and now there it is. So this is what Christian nationalists are up to. This is what they're thinking about. This is what they want. But it doesn't only come in a package like that. We did this presentation the other day in Missouri, and I had to say to the people, my deepest apologies for showing you Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri, and it lands on them particularly hard, and it might you too, I don't know. But here's Josh Hawley, who's taking a different tone about being a Christian nationalist, and he says this.
Some will say now that I am calling America a Christian nation. And so I am. And some will say that I am advocating Christian nationalism. And so I do.
Well, can I just editorialize for a moment? Maybe my two friends sitting here wouldn't agree with this. His smugness is just nearly too much sometimes. But the danger is not just his smugness. The danger is the things that he says. The group of people who put together the National Prayer Breakfast are people that I know. And I've been in conversations with them, and we're on their property. And they said to me, we are grooming Josh Hawley to be one of the future presidents of the United States. They're not goofing around. It's Christian nationalists. This was not an accident that 2 months ago, Josh Hawley gave that speech on the fundamental basis of conservatism in the United States, and that it's based on Augustinian Christianity and Western civilization being Christian civilization. That's what they're up to. So sometimes it's very cheering, sometimes it's very stable, sometimes it's very personal. Christian nationalism has many versions and many variants as it plays out. I'm going to show you one little clip here, and then you're going to hear from Nick. He'll explain what's going on. This is a woman from Ottawa County in West Michigan. And Ottawa County was taken over by a group of Christian nationalists at the county board level, a thing called the Ottawa Impact. Nick will tell you all about it. And this person that you're about to see here was being recalled for some reasons that some people wanted her off the county commission, so there was a vote to recall her. And she's holding a press conference as a representative of the county commission in her role as a county commissioner. And doing so, she says this.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
Again.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
One more time.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
Hey everybody, my name is Nick Brock, and Jesus is not Lord over Ottawa County, where I come from in West Michigan. And I've been ringing that bell as much as I can from where I live and then here today. So I just want to bring you in a bit about how that happened. So as Doug mentioned, this group, Ottawa Impact, was born out of COVID-19. The group was very upset that they had to bring their children back to school with masks. So out of this, they were born, and with that, they ran a campaign to push out the local conservative Republicans, the longtime conservative Republicans, and they wanted to replace them as the new, quote-unquote, vetted Republicans. And they did. They did that job, and they won the majority of the board. So they had been in that position since 2022. And with that, and during that time, they made a number of controversial decisions that led to a handful of lawsuits that have culminated in nearly $1 million in settlements and tax money that the taxpayers have to pay back. But all of that, how did we get to Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County with a county commissioner saying that outright? It happened on day one. When they were put into office, there was an invocation. The invocation was given by a pastor, a friend of theirs from a local church, and this pastor, a self-avowed Christian nationalist, said, the election, what happened during the election and how you got into your seats is exactly the way it's supposed to be. You were elected to be in these positions. So given that God-given authority, you have the authority here on earth based on biblical scriptures to then rule in that way. Because what is happening in front of you in the county, and even with COVID-19, is a form of tyranny. This battle between the spiritual good and evil, Democrats and Republicans, as they've put it in that way, that is what's happening. That's the tyranny that needs to be ousted. So right from the beginning, they were baptized to go ahead with this Christian nationalism and to return Ottawa County back to God. Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County. But a majority of the Ottawa County voters, when taking a poll over the past summer, did not agree with that statement. 63% of voters say, hey, we want to keep the separation of church and state. We think that this is a good idea. We think that there should be a separation between what an elected official says and believes and then what they say in that position. I'll give you a short example here. There's a billboard, not a billboard, but a yard sign, just like this, right? And it says, Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County. Now, that happened a few years before Commissioner Ebel said that, but people were placing them in their yards, and there was a lot of good discussion about if that yard sign should be there. The answer is yes, it's okay to be there. It's going to make a lot of people feel differently about it, but that's okay. That's their First Amendment. That is their right given to them and afforded to them. So we take that example then and go, all right, what does it mean to say Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County from an elected official? That is where we need to make that distinction, and that is what is Christian nationalism. So this whole conversation is going on, and the county, this Ottawa Impact Group, decided to make themselves a constitutional county. If you're familiar with that term, it just means that even though all the elected officials already declare and make an oath of a commitment to the Constitution nationally and in Michigan, they're just going to beat a dead horse with that, so to speak, and just say it again. So a local group called the Satanic Temple of West Michigan wanted to test the waters with that. If you can say Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County, can you say Hail Satan in Ottawa County? And you can, but you're going to get some pushback. You're going to get a lot of pushback. And do we have that video? No? So what happened is a local pastor, I'll take it one step back. A local pastor, a Christian pastor, wanted to give the invocation at the county commissioners meeting. And he had done this for years. And so he applies to give the invocation, but he never hears back from the board chair and from the board itself. Never hears back, sends a piece of mail. Hey, I'd like to do this. So what happens is he believes that he is being discriminated religiously for his progressive Christianity, because on the outside of his church there flies a pride flag. And this pastor, too, has helped to promote and put a Grand Haven, that's the name of the city, a pride festival in the city. So he eventually puts this litigation into place, and it's months and months and months before he is able to actually give the invocation. But in the interim of this, the Satanic Temple of West Michigan wants to get in on the game and says, hey, we're going to test this out. So they actually, one of the pastors from the Satanic Temple of West Michigan, they get to give a public comment. And they make it known that, hey, we are here to, we are testing these waters, and we want to say publicly here, hail Satan in Ottawa County. This would eventually lead to another pastor giving an invocation as a Satanist in Ottawa County. So all of this was reflected of a microcosm of this Christian nationalism. And so what I'll say here, and I'll end here, and I'll give it back to Doug. But this Christian nationalism, even when a Christian pastor is allowed to give an invocation, it really depends on what kind of Christian you are. Do you toe the line with the Christian nationalism and the Watchman's Decree? This pastor did not. And so when that pastor, his name is Jared, gave the invocation to the board finally, he was presented with a one-man protest. So you have to imagine if the pastor Jared is right here at the board, at the podium, he has his 3 minutes to give he doesn't have 3 minutes, but he's given his invocation, and behind me is the dais where all 11 commissioners are at. He's given the invocation, and one of the commissioners puts a sign right in front of his desk, and the sign says, "The War on Children." Now, what that sign meant is a direct rebuttal for what Pastor Jared stands for. Now, since Pastor Jared stands for LGBTQ plus inclusion and affirmation of that community, the War on Children is a documentary movie that purports to say that those who are aligned with that movement are promoting the grooming of children. So anybody within the LGBT plus community and those who affirm them are grooming children. So that was the one-man protest, wanting to undo and unseat what was just done. So that was really the microcosm of Christian nationalism, dropped down from the national headlines into my hometown. So that's just a piece of what it can look like, and hopefully it doesn't happen here in Albuquerque.
Thank you, Nick. And look, what goes on in Ottawa County is in West Michigan. Some of you might be familiar already with the area of West Michigan, a town called Holland, a town called Grand Rapids. You might be familiar with a person named Betsy DeVos, who was the education secretary. That's her hometown. That's her place. Her family funds a lot of things that go on in that area. But it's not because it was a hotbed of Christian nationalism that this could happen. It's happening all over the country. What we're going to show you now is an MSNBC program around a person named Myra Flores. Myra Flores ran for Congress in South Texas. We were on a bike ride that we did from San Diego, California to St. Augustine, Florida, along the U.S.-Mexico border. We rode all 3,264 miles. And we're making a documentary about life along the border. And we got to that part of Texas, over by McAllen, Texas. We start seeing these God, faith, family yard signs. And it wasn't guns on this one, it was God, faith, and family. And then Myra Flores. And I remember sending something to our political organizer, like, do we know who this Myra Flores is, who's running down here? Because Democrats always win in that part of the area. Well, there was a special election in 2021. Myra Flores ran in the special election in a movement called MAGA, Make America Godly Again, which was started by a pastor there, and she was recruited to run. She ran for office and won as a MAGA Christian nationalist candidate in South Texas along the border, flipped a congressional district among Hispanic voters. And if you think Christian nationalism is only white churches and white Christians, it is much broader than that. Huge movements in charismatic Pentecostal Latino churches, big movements in black churches that are built around Christian nationalism. They don't have the white side to it. They don't want white nationalism, but they do want it to be Christian, whatever it is that's the alternative to white nationalism. So Christian nationalism is not only racially driven by white nationalists, but it's obviously a big part of it. Well, here's a little thing about Myra Flores.
Flores is running at a time.
You'll have a chance to meet her, hear from her, and a chance to hear how she describes this. So, well, again, what you're seeing here is a portion of an MSNBC interview.
Flores is running at a time when Republican candidates around the country have called for religion to play a greater role in government, some of them calling for an end to the separation of church and state, some of them calling for the U.S. to become an explicitly Christian nation.
We need to be the party of nationalism, and I'm a Christian and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists.
The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
We asked Congresswoman Flores for her view of government and religion.
Do you think there should be a separation between church and state?
Well, I believe that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. But I do think that the church does have the right to get involved in the government and letting us know, because again, I believe that the church knows the people better than the government. And that is a fact. But I agree that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. There has to be a separation.
Train of thought, do you support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country?
Yeah, I do. I believe that we should always put God first.
Okay, now I have watched that video many, many times, so I have lots of thoughts about it. I can almost see Myra Flores at the end, when she's asked that question, not quite know how she wants to answer it. Do you support the country being a Christian nationalist country? Yes, I always think we should put God first. Well, that wasn't the question. Well, because what if you wanted to put God first and you wanted to be a Muslim nation? There's Muslim nations that say they want to put God first. Or a Jewish nation. Could it be a Jewish nation that puts God first? So she's not wanting to say it. The people around her want to say it. We're going to show you that in a moment. But she's not sure how to say it. Now, this is a place for our empathy. And by the way, this is also a place for us to start to see when you're talking to friends or family members or people in politics about this kind of thing, you start to feel this little like, oh, maybe you're not quite so comfortable there. Take that as an invitation and an opportunity. Well, some people who don't necessarily want to offer you that opportunity is this fella. Seems like a perfectly nice guy, has an idea and has organized how to get Latino churches to become a part of a political operation. Because fundamentally, Christian nationalism is not a religious movement, it is a political movement. It uses the trappings and the words and the ideas of Christianity in order to attain political power. And here's the beauty of Christian nationalism and Christian nationalists. They tell you that. They don't make you figure it out. They flat out tell you, and you're about to hear that right now.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Bienvenido's Faith Assembly team? How do you all organize?
In 2019, we realized that to better engage and mobilize the Latino voters and to expose the message of conservative policy, the best way to do it was through the churches, because 8 out of 10 times, if a Latino is being outreached through the church, more than likely they believe in some of the conservative platforms. So it's much easier for them to get out and vote Republican.
The Congresswoman started and ended her campaign in the church. How effective was that?
The most effective.
Yeah.
Myra Flores were able to bring that message to South Texas and say, listen, no more church lockdowns, no more harassment and attacks on the church. Get out and vote for someone that will protect religious liberty. And that's why over, I think, 75, a coalition of over plus 75 churches came together and said, we are supporting Myra Flores through our congregation, letting them know who is running for office.
Is that a new strategy? I mean, is it a new strategy to sort of deploy churches and pastors?
The Democrat Party has been doing that with black churches for years and years and years. And it took outside organizations like Bienvenido to come in and tell churches, hey, it is your right to be involved. So Republicans don't start strategizing with Latino pastors and churches like the Democrats have done for years with the black church. There will be no victory for conservative candidates across the country.
God, family, country. Why do you think those three words resonated so much?
It is
With Latinos specifically.
It is the heartbeat of the Latino community. You can't have moral values without having faith in something, faith in having understanding that God is, your rights come from God and God only, right? So tying those things into
That's a dangerous thing to say, that your rights come from God and God only. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? Well, I would rather say that my rights come from God than rights come from government. Government can take away my rights. I mean, in the Constitution, we have unalienable rights that come from our Creator, being that we have the opportunity of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That only comes from you understanding that there is a moral conscience, right? And for Latinos, that means believing that our rights come from, our God-given rights come from God and not government. And I think that Congresswoman Maya Flores was able to make that a political campaign.
When I talked to the Congresswoman, she even said that she would support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country.
Mm-hmm.
Those are her words. Mm-hmm. Do you support something like
100%.
that?
100%.
100% committed to being a Christian nationalist country, and there will be no victory for the conservative movements if we don't start strategizing within the Latino churches. The Christian nationalist movement has figured out where they can find new adherents and how they can win in politics. So that's what it's about. So when you hear people who sometimes are good-hearted but are mistaken that Christian nationalism is just trying to let Christians be Christian and free speech in America and freedom of religion, that's not what it is. And there are so many political operatives that are engaged in it. Now, that's probably why you are here. You probably know that, understand that, recognize that. But I can assure you, many people in your life don't recognize that, and they don't know that. They wouldn't have in their experience that people want to confuse the distinction between a citizen's motivation and faith and the government's act of privileging religion. Okay, here's one more for you. Some of you might remember who this person is. He used to be a senator from Alabama. Then he was the Attorney General of the United States of America, which is what role he's in when this video was made. Now I don't know what he's doing. But when Jeff Sessions stood behind this podium, the Department of Justice, and said to the American people, I want to explain to you why we are going to invoke a family separation policy at the United States border, that if families come seeking asylum or temporary protective status in the United States, and they cross the border in order to ask for that asylum, because you have to cross onto U.S. soil to seek asylum. If they do that and they have children, we will separate the parents from their children. And he said, we are doing this to send a message to the people in Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, not to come to the United States seeking asylum. As a caution to come to the United States, we will separate children. In that announcement, this is what he said.
And I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes. Orderly and lawful processes are good in themselves. Consistent, fair application of law is in itself a good and moral thing, and that protects the weak. It protects the lawful. Our policies that can result in short-term separation of families is not unusual or unjustified.
Editorial moment. Yes, it is unusual. Yes, it is unjustified. Yes, it is immoral. And yes, they have lost track of thousands of children. It's terrible. That entire little bit, which again, we've watched plenty of times, those of us who travel doing this presentation, so we know it. It's maddening because it's like rotten bread on a sandwich. Orderly, lawful practices are good in and of themselves. Yes, that's true. That's why the former president should be charged for the crimes that he has committed and follow whatever process a legal, orderly process of the government dictates. But you don't need to mansplain government law by commending to us the Apostle Paul. Can you imagine if the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, a Muslim man, were to stand up and say, I would like to commend to you the Prophet Muhammad in your consideration of why you should follow the laws in the United States? People would lose their minds. And if they wouldn't lose their minds, or if they wouldn't lose their minds over that, but they would over saying Christian things, then they're probably Muslim nationalists. And if they would lose their minds over that, but not over just Jeff Sessions, it's because they think Christianity gets a pass. So these are the ways that this stuff shows up. Christian nationalism shows up in all these subtle little underlying spaces and places. It's on our currency. It's in our pledge. The fact that we have chaplains in many of our governmental institutions, chaplains that open the Senate at the federal level or at the state level. We don't need to be baptizing, just an editorial moment, we don't need to be baptizing our government in any of our religion. In fact, the fact that we let pastors, as I have done for 20, 30 years, serve as an actor of the state of Minnesota where I live, and maybe pastors in Albuquerque do the same, to oversee the officiant process of marrying people. Why do I get to show up and marry two people? I don't show up at your house closing and like, all right, we got a deal here, everybody. You know, just Pastor Doug in the room, want to make sure we Christianize this thing. But weddings, we are like, well, that's kind of a religious thing and kind of a state thing, and seemingly we can't find our way through this. So we have lots of ways to be digging this stuff up and digging it out. But we probably can't pull up every wheat and every weed and every tear. But we can solve this kind of stuff, the Jeff Sessions level, or the Myra Flores level, or the Josh Hawley level of Christian nationalism. All right, now we're going to let you hear from some other people who are really good on these topics as well. You're going to hear from someone here named Amanda Tyler. Amanda Tyler is the president of a group that you can see up there called the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. Now, depending on your religious background, you see words like Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, and you might think to yourself, well, that's like Liberty Baptist or something. These are actually the American Baptists, and if you don't know the scope of religion, the American Baptists were the abolitionists in the 1700s forward. The American Baptists have been a progressive movement of Christianity. So Amanda Tyler is the leader of that. We were doing this presentation in Ohio, and I was doing a little talk like this at a church called, I don't know, like Denton Community Church or something, and rooms full of people. And as I got to about this point, I see people sort of rustling a little bit. And I kind of paused, and the person over here, she raised her hand and she said, yeah, we're an American Baptist church. We know that. I was like, I just mansplained the American Baptist to the American Baptist. But a lot of people don't know who the American Baptists are. They don't know that in every religious tradition, there are more conservative and more progressive extremes, and people follow somewhere along the line. So that's the American Baptist. This is Amanda Tyler. Amanda Tyler was good enough to be one of our guests, where right after January 6, 2021, we put together our first take at all of this called The Threat to Christian Nationalism. We put together a series of webinars 7 weeks in a row where we interviewed experts. You're going to see some of those now on what Christian nationalism is and what it means and how it plays out in our world. And you'll see up there Christy Berghoff, who's one of our team members, travels with us, and Stephanie Spalding, and she's part of our work. So the three of us hosted a weekly conversation for a number of weeks in a row with experts, and that's what you're going to see. The reason I'm explaining that to you is because you might want to utilize the curriculum that came out of that. We now have that video curriculum together for small groups or for friends to use or for family members. So on our website, you can go on and download all that curriculum and use those. They've been broken up into little discussion groups so you can have little pieces of this. Then there's PDF curriculum that you can either have on a phone or print out. So if you want to take any of this that's not in a format like this, but do it in discussion format, this is what that's for and what it's about. So anyway, Amanda Tyler is really great on this topic, and you're going to feel really great. Has anybody met her yet? She's been in Albuquerque a couple of times. She travels around, does things like this too with the American Baptist. So here's Amanda.
I think that's really a vital point, because we should have a common understanding about what we're talking about as far as Christian nationalism goes. And I'm going to point to the statement that's available at ChristiansAgainstChristianNationalism.org. You know, the work that we did back in 2019 was about providing an advocacy platform for people who were interested in learning more and for taking a public stand. And the centerpiece of the project is a statement. And in the statement itself, we define Christian nationalism as a political ideology that seeks to merge our identities as Americans and Christians. So a few things here. One, we are specifically talking in the American context. This is something that comes up. This is not particular to the United States, but in our work, we are really focusing on the American expression of Christian nationalism, and so we talk explicitly about American and Christian identities. But we also want to distinguish that Christian nationalism is not Christianity. Christian nationalism is a political ideology. Christianity is a religion. That said, you can't totally divorce Christianity out of it. It'd be great just to say, oh, this has nothing to do with Christianity. Yeah. That would be really easy, right? That's not accurate. And that's because Christian nationalism uses the narratives and the symbols, and in some cases, even the theology of Christianity to further this political ideology. But as we define Christian nationalism, it is not itself a religion. It is more about identity than religion in a lot of ways. And we get at this in one of our resources that we have available at Christians Against Christian Nationalism, a really handy one-pager that your guests last week, Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry, helped us put together called What is Christian Nationalism? And we talk about how it's more identity than religion. When we define Christian nationalism, I think it's also important to say what it's not. It's not patriotism. Patriotism is a love of country, and we can show our love of country in a number of different ways. We can wave an American flag. We can protest in the streets. We can exercise our constitutional rights, right? These are all different ways to be patriotic. Nationalism is a love of country that also requires an allegiance to it above everything else, including our theological views. And so when our theological view, when our patriotism starts to ask us to sacrifice our theological views, that's no longer patriotism. That's nationalism. And particularly as we're talking about here, Christian nationalism.
So I would highly encourage you to follow Christians Against Christian Nationalism. Their one-pager, all the rest of that stuff would be super helpful. And I really like the name of it. I was one of the early signers on the Christians Against Christian Nationalism because Christians have to respond to Christian nationalism. Now, Jewish leaders do it, Muslim leaders do it, secular leaders do it, pagan leaders do it. But I'll say to other Christians, we've got to solve this issue inside of Christianity where it's finding its safe haven. That's the most important place for it. All right, Samuel Perry and Andrew Whitehead have been experts in this area for a while, both raised in Christian communities, by the way. Now are both sociologists, one in Ohio and one in Oklahoma, and they're secular sociologists. They wrote a book called Taking America Back for God. It's an explanation about how Christian nationalism works in the country. It's not a how-to manual, but I do wonder sometimes if people accidentally order it thinking they're going to, it's going to be a how-to manual. But they use a whole bunch of surveys. They're going to reference those in this little clip we're about to show you. The surveys that they ask people a range of questions. Do you think America should be like this or like this? And then how do you answer? And so up on the screen there, you can see the kind of ways that people would answer a question like, should the U.S. Constitution was inspired by God, written by humans, neither or no opinion? And then people answer along that spectrum. This is what puts together the kind of information you have where you'll find out how many people in the United States are Christian nationalists. Then it winds them up on a scale. And Andrew's going to reference this scale. He's going to reference the idea that you have rejectors on one side and you have ambassadors of Christian nationalism on the other. Now, the people you've been hearing so far are Christian nationalists, Josh Hawley and the like, and Jeff Sessions. They'd be way over there as ambassadors. Groups like ours, and maybe you, because you're in this room, would be way over here as rejectors of Christian nationalism. But most Americans find themselves somewhere in the middle. More than 50% of people end up on the supporting Christian nationalism side of the equation based on the questions that they're asked in surveys like this one. So that's what they're going to be referencing. We found it helpful to just let people have a visual because this information sort of comes pretty fast. So Sam and Andrew are good friends of this work and do really great work of their own, and they were good enough to be on our interviews as well. And they'd be in the curriculum if you wanted to use that video curriculum.
Yeah, well, I'll dive in first and then let Sam finish it off. So in our book, we performed or were able to get data on these large national surveys, and we asked respondents 6 different questions where they could strongly disagree to strongly agree with them. Things like, the United States is part of God's plan, or the federal government should advocate Christian values, or declare the U.S. a Christian nation. And so the degree to which people strongly agreed with those or strongly disagreed, we assigned them point values, and we're able to create a scale by adding all those different questions together. And we did that because it's really important to understand that Christian nationalism isn't a binary, yes or no, but that Americans really are all along a spectrum where some embrace it really strongly. Some, see, Christianity being a part of what we do in the U.S. is important, and others kind of resist that, or the rejectors who we see on the very end of the scale say, there should be no fusion of this type of Christianity, which we define in our book is really this idea of a white, conservative, natural-born citizen. That's the Christian that they're talking about. American civil society shouldn't be fused to this type of Christianity. And so when we're able to create that scale, we can now look at, well, how do these respondents view the world? And there were 3 basic things that we tried to do throughout the book and were our main takeaways. Is the first, that Christian nationalism matters. And so Sam, he'll be able to share, even with his more recent data, that when we're looking at anti-democratic attitudes, or we're looking at policing of African Americans, if we're looking at immigration, if we're looking at refugees, if we're looking at religious minorities, we're looking at all these different important hot-button issues, Christian nationalism consistently matters. Over and above whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you're an evangelical or a mainline Protestant or unaffiliated, whether you attend church a lot or you believe the Bible should be read literally, when we account for all those things, Christian nationalism is still consistently one of the most important predictors. So what that tells us is that this is a key lens through which Americans view their social worlds. Whether they embrace it or reject it, it is doing work in how people are interacting with their world. The second thing we find is that Christian nationalism is not only really important, but it's an actual thing. And I just use kind of this, non-sociological language here, because it isn't just racism, it isn't just conservative politics, it isn't just authoritarianism, but that it is something different. It's its own thing, and so we're studying that. And then our final kind of main finding is that Christian nationalism does not necessarily equal being religious or being evangelical or being a faithful Christian. Because we find that those that reject Christian nationalism but maybe attend an evangelical Protestant church, they look completely different from fellow evangelicals who might embrace Christian nationalism really strongly. And so this is something that cuts across religious traditions. So if you're a white Catholic or a white mainline Protestant who embraces Christian nationalism, the likelihood that you really support the insurrectionists is equally high to white evangelicals, what we're finding. And so this is something that really operates across religious traditions. And so those are some of the key kind of points we make in the book. But Sam's been collecting some amazing data lately. And so, yeah, Sam, I'll let you share just a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, just to finish off the discussion of the book, though, I think the way the book progresses is we describe how really Christian nationalism worships at the holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order. It values 3 things primarily: power, and making sure that our group stays in power and is able to maintain that power. We demonstrate that in the book through its Christian nationalist support of Donald Trump and his policies and his brand of politics. And we've been able to demonstrate that in subsequent studies as well. That Christian nationalism, and especially white Christian nationalism, is very concerned with maintaining proper boundaries between us and them. And that's really one of the things that Christian nationalism boils down to, is marking off who is the us that has the rightful power in the United States and who is the them that we oppose and want to make sure that we marginalize or oppress or drive out. And then the last one is order. Christian nationalism at its core longs to establish and reinforce a very particular traditionalist social order in which everybody recognizes their proper place in the family, in society, in the church. And so it manifests in a variety of ways, but really that's kind of the breakdown of the book, is how Christian nationalism reinforces and worships at that holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order.
Well, we know that's a lot to take in, right? It's heavy stuff, and I don't know about you, but when I watch that Jeff Sessions clip, my blood pressure goes up. So we thought we'd give you a little music. This is a song I wrote to process a lot of these ideas and the things I was seeing after the 2016 election, when 81% of white evangelicals voted for a man that looks nothing like Jesus. And I thought every line in the sand that Trump crossed, that would be the moment that Christians stood up and said, no, that's enough. But when we started putting kids in cages and Christians were silent, that was a bridge too far for me, and maybe for you as well. So that's what this song is about. It's a bit of my story and maybe a bit of your story as well. It's called Hymn for the 81%. I grew up in your churches, Sunday morning and evening service. I knelt in tears at the foot of the rugged cross. You taught me every life is sacred, feed the hungry and clothe the naked. I learned from you the highest law is love. And I believed you when you said I should trust the words in red to guide my steps through a wicked world. I assumed you'd do the same, so imagine my dismay when I watched you lead the sheep straight to the wolves. You said to love the lost, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Oh, they started putting kids in cages, ripping mothers from their babies, and I looked to you to speak on their behalf. Oh, but all I heard was silence. Or worse, you justified it, singing glory, hallelujah, raise the flag. See, your fear turned to hatred, but you baptized it with language torn from the pages of the good book. And you weaponize religion, and you wonder why I'm leaving to find Jesus on the wrong side of your walls. And you said to love the lost, well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth, well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome, justice roll down. Come home, come home. You're better than this. Oh, you taught me better than this. Come home, come home. You're better than this. I used to think you were better than this. Come home, come home. Oh. Maybe I was too naive, or I just didn't want to see that there's always been a little poison in the well. Our churches sit on stolen land, a nation built by stolen hands, and we use the Bible to justify it all. Yeah, from slavery and segregation to mass deportation, this is who we are, but not who we have to be. There's a lot of work to do to pull up the evil by the roots, but repentance has to come before there's peace. You said to love the lost, I'm trying to love you now. You said to speak the truth, that's why I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? Be love overcome, and justice roll down. Be love overcome, and justice roll down. Be love overcome, and justice roll down. May love overcome and justice roll down. Thank you so much.
One of the things Dan didn't mention there was that after he wrote that song, he was leader of a church, leading music at a church, and the song got picked up by Fox News and was put on there and was seen as this thing they thought was a real problem. And church started getting threats, and then they fired him. And we had just heard about the song when we were traveling around, and Dan had come and played a couple of events with us, and then we reached back out and said, "Could you do some more?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I'm more free now than I used to be," and now finds himself out here on the bus because sometimes we don't even know how much the systems that we're in don't want us to speak out against some of these things and some of these issues. Okay, a little recap here. We had suggested that knowing what someone believes can be really helpful in engaging in empathy. I want to suggest to you, and some people like to take a quick photo of this, that there's 5 major kinds of beliefs that people will hold to being a Christian nationalist. Some people like all 5 of them, some like 1 or 2. One of those is the idea that our nation was started as a Christian country. You're going to want to work up an answer to that. It will come up, I promise you. America started as a Christian nation. And if you're talking to people who love a good origin story, whether it's in their Marvel comics or in families, or they go out to dinner with a couple they just met and they say, "So how did you two meet?" Whatever it is, some people really just love an origin story and they want to go back. We have shirts over there that say we're not going back to Christian nationalism. We're not going back to a whole lot of other things as well. But some people love a backward-facing life. So they're going to believe that the United States was started as a Christian nation for Christian nation purposes. A lot of answers to that. Tried to give you some of that at the beginning, but just know that that's going to be coming. The second is this confusion between church and the people. That's really confusing for folks. They don't know where the county commissioner's belief in Ottawa County that Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County, which she can say at church or in her own heart, but once she takes on the obligation of a civic leader, she has to decide what is left behind and what is pushed ahead. That's not easy. So some people take an easy way out, and we can encourage our friends and families to think about that a little bit more differently. This third one's a little more subtle, but I think one of the more powerful pieces, and that is that the United States should be seen in biblical terms as the new Israel, the nation through which God will fulfill its promises to the world. Some of you know enough about Bible stuff that you know that like there's this thing that Christians had to figure out if they were going to be in the lineage of Judaism, because Jesus was a Jew, not a Christian. So if they were going to figure out how to be in the lineage of Judaism and be Christian but not Jews, how do they connect that together? So some of the early theories of Christianity, the Apostle Paul was a conveyor of this, was that the community of followers, the Christians, become the new Jerusalem. Well, these Christian nationalists take that to then mean an actual nation would be the new nation of Israel. We were at an event where an Ottawa County event, actually, one of the Ottawa County commissioners, a very conservative Republican, was being drilled out of office by more conservative Republicans who are Christian nationalists, like Nick told you about. And he said this great line. He said, you know, I grew up going to church all the time. And our church always told us to go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. Don't go into all disciples and make nations. Christian nationalism has it backward of what the call is to be. So there's some things we can respond to when people start thinking and talking like God's call to the world is to use the United States. And then this good versus evil thing. That's part of the new variant. Part of the new variant of Christian Nationalism 19 is that the evildoers want to take over your church and end Christianity around the world. And they're going to use church shutdowns and other ways to do it. Mike Flynn and others travel around the country in these big crusades that they do, convincing people that it's good versus evil. They're fully on this thing. Some of you might be familiar enough with the Bible to know this little phrase that our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities in the heavenly realms. These guys are like, our battle's not against flesh and blood. It's against the evildoers out there that manifest in flesh and blood and normally manifest as a Democrat. Like, it's just wild to hear it over and over. And honestly, if you don't believe me, you think I'm exaggerating, I'll show you my text messages with Casey. We do this all the time, and he reminds me of this. And then finally is the role of the United States in the Seven Mountains. So this can help you to have some understanding that the Christian nationalist friends you have aren't just wacky. They're not even more Christian. Like, none of this stuff has anything to do with Christianity. You're not going to read your Bible. You're not going to follow the teachings of Jesus. You're not going to find the Sermon on the Mount calling you to do what Christian nationalists are doing. But you will find these kinds of excuses and these kinds of rationale for it. So what can we do? Well, we'd like to suggest that there's a couple of things that we can do. Oh, by the way, I won't say a lot about this. The reason COVID-19 was the cue for so many of these people was the fundamental decision of nearly every state and even local agencies to not declare churches or synagogues or mosques or any community gathering of organized purpose as essential. The alcohol or the liquor store could be open. Delta Airlines could fly. You could go to Home Depot, but you couldn't come into a room with 12 people that go to your church. They felt like that was wrong, but it wasn't just because we were all trying to figure it out. And frankly, and I've been a pastor a long time, when all this stuff came down, it was like 2 months, like just settle down a little bit. But they weren't treating it like that, this Christian Nationalist group. They were like, this is all pretext for how do we shut down churches. That's what it was about. And they're really serious about it.
However,
I won't even hit you with that guy. So the three big questions: what do you believe? Why do you believe it? And what function does it have for you? We'll say this a little piece of advice to churches. Let's make civic engagement a part of a discipling project. We live in a democracy. Let's help people in our churches know how to engage politically. We don't have to tell them how to vote. I've been a pastor long enough and a preacher for, nearly my entire adult life. Here's the one thing I know. People don't believe what their preachers tell them, and they don't do what their pastors tell them to do. So don't even try that. It doesn't work. Like, what's the point, right? You use other things, use other influences. But we can find ways to talk about civics and politics and what does it mean and how do we engage. This thing we do of invoking the no-talk rules in our religious communities is leaving the door open for people who don't follow those no-talk rules to use their political vision to explain religion to people. And it's killing us in this country. So if you have little grandkids like I do, you might know what it means to know that you have to talk about Bruno. And if you don't know, then that's okay. For organizations, what do we need to do? And here I'm thinking specifically of people that run nonprofit organizations or voting organizations or civic organizations. We have to find a way to make space for Christian nationalists in our democracy. We cannot keep riding a seesaw of 50% plus one, where we're in charge and then they're in charge, and looking around the world and saying, I don't recognize America. I don't know who those people are. We have to start to understand who those people are. A few years ago, I used to have a radio show in Minneapolis on a progressive talk radio station. It's called Religious Radio. That's not quite right, which I really like. And I would cover religious stuff. And Donald Trump came to Minneapolis because he was touting his tax cut bill. At the same time, he was attacking Ilhan Omar. So there was a big group of people in this small little town outside of Minneapolis where Trump was going on this little 2-lane road. This side is a little road out here. No, more like this road here, the small little road. On one side were a bunch of Trump supporters with Trump signs, because that's what happens when the president shows up. And on the other side were Ilhan supporters. They were protesting the president. These people all lived within driving distance of each other, quite literally neighbors, right? I would move back and forth across the street. People on both sides said the same thing to me. I'd say, like, what are you experiencing? Why are you here? They would all say some version of, I don't know who those people are. The people on Ilhan Omar's side and the people on the Trump side, pointing at each other. I don't recognize them. I don't know who they are. I don't know what motivates them. And I don't know if they want to hurt me. And then the one thing all the people on the Trump side said additionally was, we're not bad people for supporting Donald Trump. And I thought, oh, someone's telling you you're bad people. I'd be like, yeah, my mom, my husband, my kids, somebody. So if you think Trump supporters don't feel like the country thinks they're bad people, and we also should find a way to get over that. Now, I don't want anyone voting for Donald Trump, but I think we're better off loving people into a change of behavior. I think God's kindness leads us to repentance more than shame or any of the other things. And that's hard. That's a lot of work for a lot of us. But when people are standing on sides of the road looking at each other saying, I don't recognize you, our nonprofit and organizational sides of our society have to find ways to help us understand each other. It's really important because we are all we've got. Humanity only has humanity in the living animals and insects. We can't keep treating each other as our enemies. We have to find a way through this and over this stuff. And, from our lips to God's ear, may someday we not have to deal with the choice of a person like Donald Trump as president again. But that doesn't mean that people who love him and want him to be president aren't going to be pushing Christian nationalism and seeing him as the success story of Christian nationalism. They will, and they will. Then what can individuals do? We would say start with empathy. And the difference between empathy and sympathy, you've probably heard it 100 times. You're not feeling sorry for someone. You're trying to understand their position from their position. Why is it meaningful to them? We all have a lot of conversations in this work that we do and all the groups trying to figure out, like, what do you need to say to get people to listen to you? This happens all the time. I was on Morning Joe the other day talking about the work that we do trying to get religious voters. And, Joe asked me and Mika, they're like, hey, what do we do, Pastor, to get these people? Like, it's a good question. It's a fine question. How do you get people to listen to you? I promise you, the number one way you get people to listen to you is to listen to them, to know what moves and motivates them. It's not complicated once you know what motivates them. The problem is we're all such enigmas. The thing we say to ourselves about what motivates us isn't always what motivates us. This is the craziest part of all of us, right? So what makes us just so hard to live with ourselves is we have a story about why we think we're doing what we're doing. So getting to the answer of the question of what does this do for you is not just taking a person's first pass at an answer. It's allowing you to hear them as they're hearing themselves. One of the best phrases you can use in a conflictual conversation that you're both wanting to be in, meaning, like, if you're in a conflictual conversation you want out of, just leave. But if you're in a conflictual conversation that you both agree to stay in, one of the best things you can say to a person who you disagree with is, say a little more about that. Because most of us only have so much we can say about the thing that we hold to until we find ourselves repeating ourselves. And once we kind of run out of steam, then we're like, okay, well, that's all I've got. So once we let people actually say it all the way through, we all realize we're kind of running on real tentative belief systems here. And then we're invited in. And then, of course, use curiosity engagement. And the degree to which you are not actually curious about your opposing person's idea, a person's opposing ideas, the level to which you're not curious about that is probably the point you should stop. If you actually don't care, then just, okay, your time there is done. That's good enough. It's like that piece of gum you've been chewing. It was great at the start, but now you're done with it. You can just be done with conversations if you're actually not curious anymore. It's the one thing that you can own, and owning your own agency and all of this is super important. So we're going to serenade you out with a little call. This is a really sweet little call about what kind of world we can live in. And then there'll be cookies and food and other things if you want to. If you want that. And then, yeah, thank you very much. Then we're going to invite you to sign the bus. So we'd love to have your signature on the bus before we go. And we would like to take you with us. If you want anything from that back table back there, we'd love to have you take some of that. As we like to say, we'd like you in the tank with us. 4 things get us around this country: faith, hope, love, and diesel. So if you want to be in the tank with us, any donation you make back there goes right into the tank and gets us off to Phoenix tomorrow, and then Southern California, then back to Phoenix, and then to Omaha, and then Minneapolis, and then Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, and we stay out doing this and other events similar to this, rally events and political events all the way through Election Day. So we'd love to take you with us, literally. If you want to travel with us, our schedule is up there. We'd love to have you travel with us, or figuratively by writing your figures on the bus. Or getting in the tank with us by making a donation in the back.
This is a song that reminds us that no one is free until we're all free. It goes like this. There's a world at war, caught in suffering, silent casualties. Oh God, grant us peace. In these sleepless nights, I can hardly breathe. Despite brutality, I know that we'll be free. I know that we'll be free. So let the light in, keep it shining. Let it break into the darkness. All that love is us to see, we'll all be free. So let the light in, keep it shining. Let it break into the darkness. All that love is us to see, we'll all